Welcome, dear listeners. Mooncat here, your guide through the quiet hours and timeless stars. Tonight we visit the Eternal Tea House, a tale of comfort, memory, and quiet magic. Now, let's begin. It begins in the in-between, when the world loosens its grasp on the waking and releases them into a quiet drift. The air is weightless, suspended between the blue of dusk and the black velvet of true night. Somewhere far beyond, where the stars begin to wink into place, there is a sound soft and steady, like the low hum of a kettle just beginning to simmer. It calls you, though you cannot say why. You find yourself moving toward it, stepping lightly over a path that wasn't there before. Beneath your feet, the ground shifts. Cobblestones one moment, cool moss the next, and sometimes something that feels like starlight itself. You don't question it. This is a place where questioning has no purchase, where your only task is to follow the hum, the faint pull that beckons you forward. The Eternal Tea House stands waiting at the end of the path. Its shape is soft and undefined, shifting slightly as you look at it. A cottage, a lantern-lit pavilion, a tree hollow with glowing windows. It seems to know what you need it to be. Golden light spills from its door, pooling like melted honey on the ground outside. The hum resolves into a gentle chime as you step closer. A bell that rings not to summon, but to welcome. You pause on the threshold, a thin strip of wood or stone that divides the dreamscape from the warm glow within. The space inside is quiet but alive, the kind of quiet that holds its breath, waiting for you to notice it. The air smells faintly of tea leaves and rain, soaked earth, mingled with something sweeter. Perhaps the memory of a favorite dessert. And then they appear, the host. Tall and calm as the turning sky, they move as though gravity cannot entirely claim them. Their silver hair flows like a river under moonlight, and their indigo robes shimmer faintly, embroidered with constellations that seem to shift with the subtle motion of their step. They do not speak, but their presence fills the room with an unspoken invitation. You are welcome here. The space unfolds as you enter. There are tables and chairs, mismatched yet harmonious, arranged as though they have always belonged together. A fireplace flickers in one corner, its glow casting shadows that dance slowly, soothingly on the walls. The ceiling rises into an unseen height, and if you tilt your head just so, you might catch a glimpse of stars glittering in its depths. You are not alone. Across the room, a visitor sits hunched over a table, their hands wrapped around a delicate porcelain cup. They are young, their face drawn with the tension of someone searching for something they've almost forgotten how to find. You cannot hear their voice, but you see their lips move, murmuring something to the host, who listens with infinite patience. The host moves to the counter, where jars of tea leaves line the shelves. They select one carefully, their movements deliberate and unhurried. The tea is prepared with an almost ceremonial grace. The slow pour of hot water, the swirl of steam that curls into the air like a silver ribbon. The visitor watches, their posture softening as the host sets the cup before them. You watch too as they take their first sip. Their eyes close, and a change washes over them, subtle but unmistakable. It is as though a veil has lifted, revealing not a new thing, but a long-forgotten one. Their shoulders relax, their lips curve into a small, unbidden smile. The room fills with a warmth that is not entirely of the heart. You cannot see the memory they are tasting, but you can feel its shape, the rough texture of a paintbrush handle, the bright splash of color on canvas, the low, steady voice of someone encouraging them to try again, even when it felt impossible. The host stands nearby, silent but present, a calm anchor in the dreamer's unfolding remembrance. The visitor sets the empty cup down with a gentle clink and leans back, their expression softened by a quiet peace. The memory has not solved anything, not entirely, but it has given them something else. A moment of comfort, a reminder of joy. The host inclines their head, and the visitor nods in return. Slowly their form begins to fade, dissolving into the warm light of the tea house, carried back into the dreamscape from which they came. For a moment, all is still. Then the host turns, their gaze sweeping across the room until it falls on you. Their expression is unreadable, but their eyes seem to hold the entire night sky within them. They gesture lightly, their hand a question. Will you stay? The pull of the tea house is gentle but insistent, wrapping around you like a favorite blanket. Somewhere beyond its walls, the world spins on, but here, time stretches and softens, asking nothing of you but to simply be. You step further inside, and the door closes behind you with the faintest whisper, sealing you into the threshold of dreams. The hum of the kettle begins again, and you know that soon another visitor will arrive, drawn like you to this quiet heaven between dusk and dawn. For now, you take your place, an observer in this timeless refuge. The night is young, and the tea is waiting. The rain had begun to fall softly, painting the cobblestones outside the Eternal Tea House with a glistening sheen. The gentle patter against the windows was like the whisper of a distant lullaby, soothing yet tinged with a quiet melancholy. Inside, the keeper moved through the space as though choreographed by the rhythm of the rain, their steps as light as the mist settling over the city. The tea house felt alive tonight, its golden light stretching warmly into the shadows, inviting all who sought solace. The door creaked open, and with it came a figure cloaked in both darkness and sorrow. She stepped inside hesitantly, her movements burdened by an invisible weight. Her long coat was damp, her gloved hands trembling as they clutched a small, weathered photograph. The keeper's gaze met hers, and in that moment no words were needed. "Please," the keeper said softly, gesturing to a seat near the fireplace. The woman nodded, lowering herself into the chair, as though she feared she might crumble if she moved too quickly. The keeper approached with quiet reverence. "You have carried something heavy for far too long," they observed, their tone neither prying nor judgmental. The widow's lips quivered, but no words came. Instead, she placed the photograph on the table, her fingers lingering on its edges. It was faded with age, the image of a man smiling in the sunlight, barely visible beneath the wear. The keeper studied it for a moment, then turned to the shelves, selecting a jar of tea leaves that shimmered like the surface of a moonlit lake. They prepared the tea with the same deliberate care as always, the motions almost ritualistic. When the cup was ready, they placed it gently before the widow. "This tea will help you see what your heart already knows," the keeper murmured. "Drink, and let it guide you." The widow wrapped her hands around the cup, its warmth seeping through her gloves. She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the swirling liquid as though searching for answers within its depth. Finally, she lifted it to her lips and took a sip. The air around her seemed to shift, growing lighter, softer, until she was no longer in the tea house. She stood instead in a garden bathed in golden sunlight, the scent of blooming lilacs filling the air. Birds sang from the treetops, their melodies weaving together in a symphony of light. And there he was. Her husband stood at the garden's edge, his familiar figure framed by the soft glow of afternoon light. He looked exactly as she remembered. Strong, kind, and smiling in that way that had always made her feel as though she were the only person in the world. "Margaret," he said, his voice a balm to her soul. She stepped toward him, her heart aching with both joy and sorrow. "James," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. He reached out a hand, and though she knew she could not touch him, the gesture was enough. "You've been holding on to the past for so long, my love," he said gently, "but I am not lost. I am in every moment we shared, every memory that made you smile. But how can I let go?" Margaret asked, her voice breaking. "If I do, I'm afraid I'll lose you completely." James shook his head, his expression as steady as the earth beneath her feet. "You carry me with you always. But you must also make room for the light ahead, Margaret. You are not meant to live only in the shadow of yesterday." The garden began to fade, the sunlight dimming as James stepped back. Margaret reached for him, but he simply smiled and nodded toward the horizon. "Be brave, my love. Follow the light." And then he was gone, leaving her with the scent of lilacs and the echo of his voice in her heart. When Margaret opened her eyes, she was back in the tea house. The cup before her was empty, save for a few shimmering tea leaves that seemed to sparkle faintly in the firelight. She touched her cheek, finding it wet with tears, and let out a trembling breath. The keeper watched her with quiet understanding. They did not speak until Margaret finally looked up, her expression soft and contemplative. "It was beautiful," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw him. He told me to follow the light." The keeper reached beneath the counter and withdrew a small lantern, its glass panes delicately etched with the patterns of vines and blossom. When they placed it on the table, it glowed faintly, as though lit from within by an unseen flame. "This is for you," the keeper said, "a lantern to guide you through the darkness. It will not take away your sorrow, but it will remind you that even in grief, there is light to be found." Margaret stared at the lantern, her fingers tracing its intricate design. It felt warm in her hands, not in a physical sense, but in a way that touched something deep within her. She stood, clutching the lantern close to her chest, and gave the keeper a small, tentative smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier now. The keeper inclined their head. "The light will always be here for you, Margaret, should you ever need it." As she stepped back into the rainy night, the lantern in her hand glowed softly, casting a gentle light that seemed to push back the shadows. For the first time in a long while, Margaret felt something stir within her, a fragile but unmistakable hope. The keeper watched the door close behind her, their expressions serene. They turned back to the hearth, readying the tea house for its next visitor. Outside, the rain continued to fall, its rhythm steady and soothing, as though the world itself was exhaling a breath it had long held. The tea house knows who is coming before they arrive. You've noticed this, the way it seems to shift and change in subtle anticipation. The walls stretch higher tonight, their upper reaches vanishing into a velvety blackness where faint stars wink into being. The tables seem fewer now, spaced widely apart, their surfaces strewn with scattered books, inkwells and faded parchment. Shelves rise from the floor, spiraling into the shadows above, crowned with atlases and ancient tomes. The tea house feels different tonight, vast and still, but brimming with quiet possibility. The door creaks open, and a woman steps inside. She is young, her frame slight, her face marked by the tension of someone locked in a silent battle with herself. Her hair is pinned loosely, a few stray curls framing her face, and her hands clench the strap of a satchel slung over one shoulder. Her eyes are sharp but shadowed, as though she hasn't slept in days. The host appears in the same quiet, inevitable way they always do. Their indigo robes shimmer faintly, the embroidered constellations, almost alive in the low light. They greet her with a serene nod, and she hesitates, as though unsure if she should stay. But something in the air, perhaps the warm glow of the fire, or the faint hum of the kettle, softens her posture. She steps further inside, her movements tentative, and finds a seat at one of the scattered tables. The host approaches her without a word, their silver hair catching the starlight above. She meets their gaze, and for a moment the room feels suspended, balanced delicately between her weariness and the infinite patience of the host. Then, slowly she removes the satchel from her shoulder, placing it on the floor with care, as though it carries the weight of all her unsaid thought. The host inclines their head and turns toward the shelves of tea jars. Their hands hover for a moment, then select a jar whose glass shimmers faintly, as if flecked with fragments of the Milky Way. The tea inside is delicate, silver strands mingled with tiny, crystalline buds. As the kettle begins its soft, rising hum, the woman lets out a breath, her shoulders easing, as though the sound itself has loosened something in her. She glances around, her sharp eyes lingering on the books and maps, the tools of exploration scattered across the tables. When the tea is ready, the host places a porcelain cup before her. Its surface is a deep, glossy black, the tea within shining like liquid starlight. For a moment, she simply stares at it, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table. Then, with a cautious reverence, she lifts the cup to her lips and drinks. The shift is subtle at first, a softening of her brow, a flicker of something like wonder in her eyes. Then her gaze unfocuses, and you know the tea has drawn her into the depths of a memory. You can feel the shape of it, though it is not yours to see. A child stands beneath a vast, star-filled sky, her small hands clutching a notebook as she gazes upward. She is alone, but not lonely. The stars seem close enough to touch, and their light fills her with a quiet, boundless awe. She writes furiously, her pencil moving across the page as though it cannot keep up with the torrent of thoughts spilling from her. She doesn't yet understand all the words she uses, but she feels their shape, their weight, their power. Beneath the canopy of stars, she knows one thing with absolute certainty: there are stories here waiting to be told. Back in the tea house, the woman's lips part slightly, her breath catching as though the memory has stolen it from her. The firelight reflects in her eyes, which shine now with something brighter than exhaustion. The tea house seems to respond to her transformation. The shelves glow faintly, their books whispering to one another in voices too soft to hear. The woman reaches for one, an old leather-bound journal with pages yellowed by time. She opens it, her fingers brushing the edges of the paper, and begins to write. Her pen moves slowly at first, then faster, her hand steady and sure. She doesn't pause to think, doesn't hesitate. As the words spill out onto the page, the room hums with the quiet rhythm of her writing, the sound as soothing as the rustle of leaves on a calm night. The host watches her from a distance, their expression unreadable but serene. They make no move to interrupt, content to let her work in the sanctuary of the tea house. Time stretches and folds, the moments blending into one another. When she finally stops, her hand hovering over the page, her face is different. The sharpness in her features has softened, replaced by quiet determination. She closes the journal, her fingers lingering on its cover, and looks up at the host. "Thank you," she says, her voice low but steady. The host nods, their silver hair shimmering as they move to clear her cup. The woman gathers her satchel, now lighter in her grasp, and rises from her chair. She hesitates for just a moment, her gaze sweeping the room one last time, before she steps toward the door. As it closes behind her, the tea house seems to exhale, its walls settling into a new stillness. The stars above remain, faint and watchful, their light weaving through the vast, unseen spaces of the room. You sit quietly, letting the echoes of her memory wash over you. The tea house feels different again, calmer, quieter, but still alive with possibility. Somewhere on the shelves, a book shifts slightly, as though waiting for the next hand to claim it. The host returns to their place behind the counter, their movements unhurried, timeless. The night is not yet over and the tea house waits, its doors open to the dreamers who will find their way here before the dawn. The air in the tea house feels different tonight. Heavier, like the pause before a storm, though there is no storm here. Only the endless dreamscape. The fire burns low, its glow steady and watchful, and the shadows it casts seem to linger longer in the corners. You sense it, even before the door opens, the presence of a guest who carries with them something deeper, something quiet but vast. The door creaks softly, and a figure steps through. Their face is hidden beneath a gauzy veil, pale and translucent, obscuring their features, but not the shape of their presence. They are tall and slender, their movements deliberate but hesitant, as though each step carries the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. The host is there as they always are, emerging from the stillness with their indigo robes flowing like water in moonlight. Their silver hair catches the soft glow of the room as they incline their head in greeting. The veiled figure pauses, their form wavering slightly in the golden light, and then moves further inside. The tea house adjusts itself to them. The walls seem to grow closer, the shelves receding into the shadows, as if to create a space more intimate, more contained. A small table appears near the hearth, draped in soft fabric that shimmers faintly like the surface of a lake at twilight. The air is quieter here, the sounds of the kettle and the fire muted, subdued. The guest takes a seat, their hands resting lightly on the table. Their fingers are long and fine, their gestures measured, as if they are accustomed to moving with great care. They do not speak, but there is a tension in their posture, a tightly coiled presence that fills the room. The host stands for a moment, their gaze resting on the guest before turning to the shelves of tea jar. They select one that seems almost ordinary at first. Its glass is unadorned, the leaves inside a muted grey-green. But as the jar is opened, the room is filled with a scent both familiar and elusive. Soft earth after rain, the faint sweetness of forgotten flowers, and something lighter, like a distant breeze carrying a song you once knew. The kettle begins its quiet song, a hum that resonates in your chest, soothing and deep. The host works with their usual grace, pouring the hot water over the leaves, their movements unhurried, as though time itself has slowed to match the rhythm of the tea house. Steam rises from the cup, curling in intricate patterns that seem to whisper to the air around it. The guest watches the steam, their veiled face tilted slightly toward it, as though they are listening, and perhaps they are. The steam curls higher, its tendrils twisting into shapes that flicker and dissolve, impossible to hold or define. When the host sets the cup before the guest, they sit back, their hands folded in their lap. The guest's fingers tremble slightly as they lift the cup, their movements deliberate and reverent. The first sip is taken in silence, and then the change begins. It is subtle, as it always is. A ripple in the air, the softening of the guest's posture. The veil does not move, but you sense their eyes closing, their focus shifting inward. The tea house holds its breath, the fire burning lower still, its glow casting faint shadows that seem to flicker in rhythm with the steam. The memory comes, and though it is not yours, you feel its presence filling the room. A song. It begins as a single note, soft and tentative, rising from a place that feels far away. Then another note joins it, and another, until the song fills the space. It is a melody woven of sunlight and shadow, laughter and quiet, a voice strong and clear yet tiered with an aching sweetness. The guest's memory deepens. The song is their own voice, younger, steadier, untouched by time or loss. They are standing in a grove of trees, the light filtering through the leaves in golden streams. Around them others are gathered, their faces turned upward, their expressions alight with joy and wonder. The song swells, its notes carrying on the wind, reaching beyond the grove, beyond the edges of memory itself. It is a voice filled with life, with love, with all the things that have been buried beneath the years. In the tea house, the steam continues to rise, the whispers within it growing quieter, gentler, as the memory fades. The guest lowers their cup, their hands steady now, their posture no longer tense, but soft, contemplative. The host stands nearby, their expression as calm and enigmatic as ever, their presence an anchor in the room's shifting currents. The guest turns toward them, their veiled face tilting slightly upward, and though no words are spoken, something passes between them, a quiet gratitude, a silent understanding. The guest rises slowly, their movements unhurried but deliberate, as though carrying something precious within them. They pause at the door, their form wavering in the light, and then step out into the dreamscape. The door closes softly behind them, the sound barely more than a sigh. The tea house is still again. The fire crackles faintly, its light no longer flickering but steady, warm. You sit in the quiet, letting the echoes of the memory linger, their presence soft and soothing, like the final notes of a lullaby. The host begins to clear the table, their hands moving with their usual quiet grace. The kettle hums again, its sound rising gently, as if preparing for the next visitor. The stars above remain, their light steady and watchful, their presence a reminder of the endless expanse of night. The tea house waits, its doors open, its warmth and light ready to welcome the next dreamer who will find their way here before the dawn. The tea house is unusually quiet. The hearth glows faintly, its embers smouldering in a steady rhythm, as though the fire is resting between breaths. The hum of the kettle has softened to a low murmur, a sound so faint it could almost be imagined. Even the shelves, with their countless jars and books, seem to have settled into stillness. You are alone, or so it feels. No new guests have entered, and for the first time you notice the weight of the silence. Not oppressive, but deep and unbroken, like the surface of a moonlit lake. And then there is movement. The host steps into view from behind the counter, their indigo robes trailing like the edge of the night sky. Tonight their expression is different. Not distant, but pensive, as though their thoughts have turned inward. They glance toward the door, but it remains closed. Then, with deliberate grace, they prepare a single cup of tea. The tea is not for a guest. The host chooses a porcelain cup of midnight blue, its edges rimmed with silver, and sets it on the table nearest the fire. They seat themselves carefully, their movements unhurried, their presence serene. For a moment, they simply sit, their silver hair gleaming in the soft glow of the room, their hands resting lightly on the table. The tea sits before them untouched, and you realize this moment is not for drinking, it is for remembering. You have been watching, the host says suddenly. Their voice is soft, resonant, carrying the weight of years and the stillness of the stars. They do not look at you, but somehow you know they are speaking to you, or perhaps to the air or the tea house itself. Perhaps it is time you knew. They lift the cup, their movements slow and deliberate, and take a single sip. The room changes, not in shape, but in feeling. The air becomes heavier, not oppressive, but weighted with significance, like the moment just before a storm clears. The host closes their eyes, and the memory begins. You feel it more than see it, though faint images flicker at the edges of your mind. There is a field beneath a vast, starless sky, the horizon stretching endlessly in every direction. The world is still, and in that stillness there is a sense of longing, as though the earth itself is waiting for something to arrive. I was born before there was time, the host says, or perhaps I was born from it. The memory is distant now, like a word whispered too softly to hear. The field shimmers, and in its center, something begins to take shape. A faint light, pulsing gently, like the first flicker of dawn. The light expands, soft and golden, until it forms the outline of a structure, the first iteration of the tea house. Its walls are fragile, almost translucent, and within them a figure stands, unformed but already familiar. I did not create the tea house, the host continues. It created me. I was its first guest, and in that moment, I became its keeper. The figure steps forward, and you recognize the host. Not as they are now, but as they were then, formless, their edges blurred, like starlight just beginning to gather. They reach out, their hand brushing the edge of the tea house's walls, and the structure solidifies, taking on the warm, glowing presence you now know so well. It was born of need, they say, a sanctuary for those who wander, for those who have lost their way in the vast expanse of the dreamscape. The memory shifts, and you see the tea house as it once was. A small, flickering light in an endless sea of darkness. Figures come and go, their forms shadowy, indistinct. The host greets them all, their movements tentative at first, then more certain as the years pass. I have seen lifetimes, they say, their voice quiet, steady. I have served those who carry joy and sorrow, who seek answers or solace, or simply a moment of rest. Each one leaves a trace behind, a memory woven into the walls, into the air itself. The tea house grows with each memory, its light brighter, its warmth deeper. The shelves fill with books and jars, the hearth begins to burn steadily, and the space becomes what it is now. A haven, timeless and unchanging, yet alive with the echoes of those who have passed through. And yet the host continues, I am not its master. The tea house is as much a part of me as I am of it. It changes for every guest, just as I have changed for every moment it has existed. The memory fades, and the room returns to itself. The host sets the cup down gently, their gaze resting on the steam as it rises and dissipates. Why do I remain, they ask, though it seems the question is not meant for you, or perhaps not for anyone. They look up, their silver hair catching the faint firelight, their expression calm, but tinged with something deeper. A quiet acceptance, a steady resolve. Because the tea house needs me, because the dreamers need the tea house, and so I am here. The kettle hums softly in the background, and for a moment, the hosts simply sits, their gaze distant, their presence steady as the stars. Then they rise, their robes flowing like water, and carry the cup back to the counter. The room feels lighter now, as though the weight of their memory has lifted, leaving only its gentle echoes behind. The fire burns a little brighter, its glow warm and welcoming. The tea house is still again, but not silent. Somewhere, a new presence stirs in the dreamscape, its path winding toward the door. The host turns, their eyes meeting yours, and for a brief moment, there is a flicker of something in their gaze, a glimmer of understanding, or perhaps gratitude. The tea house waits, as it always does, ready to welcome the next dreamer who will find their way here before the dawn. The tea house feels different as the night stretches toward its close. There is no urgency, no rush, only a quiet inevitability, like the slow blooming of the first light before sunrise. The air is softer now, tinged with the faintest trace of the day to come, though it does not yet break the spell of the dreamscape. The fire burns low, its embers glowing like small, steady stars, and the hum of the kettle has softened to a murmur that seems to echo the rhythm in the night. The shelves, the tables, even the walls seem to settle, as though the tea house itself is beginning to prepare for rest. And then the door opens, its familiar creak like a whispered greeting. A figure steps inside, hesitating in the threshold. They are young, their face tired but kind, their movements careful, as though not to wake a sleeping child. A faint smudge of flour lingers on their sleeve, a stray thread of a blanket caught on the hem of their coat. There is a quiet weariness in their posture, the sort born not of despair, but of love and its endless demands. The host appears as they always do, their indigo robes shimmering faintly in the low light, their presence serene. They approach the guest with the same calm, measured steps, their gaze steady but warm. For a moment, the two figures stand in silence, the host's timeless stillness meeting the guest's fleeting exhaustion. The guest offers a small smile, barely more than a flicker, but it is enough. The host inclines their head and gestures toward a table near the hearth, where the fire's warmth seems to pool in golden light. The tea house adjusts itself subtly, the air growing cozier, the shadows softer. The table is bare except for a single candle that flickers gently, its light steadying as the guest takes their seat. The host turns to the shelves, their hands moving with quiet certainty. They select a jar, tucked into a shadowed corner, its glass marked with faint, delicate etchings that catch the firelight. Inside, the tea leaves are a soft, dusky lavender, mingled with tiny blossoms that seem to glow faintly, like moonlight caught in petals. The kettle begins its low hum, rising slowly, blending with the quiet crackle of the fire. The guests rest their hands on the table, their fingers brushing its smooth surface, and their gaze turns toward the hearth. For a moment their face softens, the lines of weariness easing as the warmth begins to reach them. When the tea is ready, the host sets the cup before them. A simple porcelain cup, its surface unadorned but for a faint ring of gold around its rim. The guest lifts it carefully, cradling it in their hands, and takes a slow sip. The change is gentle, almost imperceptible, but you see it in the way their shoulders relax, in the faint exhale that escapes their lip. Their gaze grows distant, their focus shifting inward as the tea draws them into a memory. You feel it as you always do, the memory unfurling like a flower in the dim light of the room. It is a quiet night, the kind that lingers at the edge of winter and spring. The guest is seated in a rocking chair, a small, swaddled bundle in their arms. The room around them is dim, lit only by the faint glow of a lantern on the table beside them. Outside, the wind whispers softly, brushing against the windows like a lullaby. The child stirs, their tiny face scrunching before settling again, their breathing soft and even. The guest hums a low, wordless tune, their voice steady and quiet, a thread of sound woven into the stillness. There is no rush in this moment, no demands or tasks waiting to be done. There is only the steady rhythm of the rocking chair, the warmth of the child in their arms, and the deep, abiding peace of holding something so small and precious, knowing it is safe. Back in the tea house, the guest lowers the empty cup, their hands resting lightly on its sides. Their eyes glisten faintly, not with sorrow, but with the fullness of something remembered, something cherished. The host watches them quietly, their silver hair catching the faint glow of the fire. They do not speak, but their presence fills the space between them, offering a kind of unspoken reassurance. The guests stand slowly, their movements unhurried, their expressions softened by the memory they now carry with them. They glance toward the host and offer a nod. a silent acknowledgement before turning toward the door. The tea house seems to hold its breath as they step into the threshold. They pause, one hand resting lightly on the door frame, and look back. For a moment, the night stretches infinitely around them. The dreamscape vast and quiet, the tea house a single, steady light within it. Then they step outside, their figure fading into the soft, silvered darkness. The room is still now, the fire burning low, the hum of the kettle fading to silence. The stars above remain, their light faint but enduring, their presence a gentle reminder of the vastness of the night. The host turns, their movements slow and deliberate, their gaze sweeping the room. The tea house is empty now, its warmth and light folded inward, ready to rest. The host moves to the counter, their hands steady as they tidy the last remnants of the night's work. And then, as the first pale light of dawn begins to brush the edges of the dreamscape, they pause. For a moment the host stands in the stillness, their silver hair gleaming softly, their indigo robes shifting like the night sky. Their gaze turns toward the door, and though it remains closed, you feel the weight of all that it holds, of every dreamer who has passed through, of every memory steeped in the steam of a cup. The host bows their head, a gesture of quiet reverence, and then turns away. The tea house waits, as it always does, for the night to fall again, for the next dreamer to find their way here, for the kettle to hum its low, welcoming tune. And somewhere, in the endless expanse of dreams, the stars hold their vigil, patient and steady, lighting the way back to this place between dusk and dawn. And so the night fades. The tea house rests once more, its doors closed, its warmth lingering in the dreamscape like a soft, golden glow. The stars remain, patient and steady, ready to guide dreamers back when the night returns. Thank you for wandering through this story with me. If you enjoyed your visit, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps keep the magic alive. Until we meet again, Mooncat.